You hear us?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Excellent. I don't know, like the morning, or I guess the month before Christmas. Okay, so now it's figuring out what is the.
Victoria, now that we know that the mic's.
Okay.
And became the.
Thank you so much. Okay. Do we know? I believe we are at a point where we can actually go back to proceeding. So for the recording, it is 7:10. We realized we were having a technical issue and we did not have audio recording. So we are going to formally call the meeting to order for a third time for the sake of the recording and move forward. I'm not going to go back through the short reflection or introductions. But Rebecca, we did just go around the room and introduce everyone in the room here. If you would like to introduce yourself, you are more than welcome to come off mute and do so as well.
Oh, sure. Rebecca Dickinson, Program Executive with Public Works.
Wonderful. Great to have you with us tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, adoption of the agenda. Any notes on agenda topics or changes that we need to make before adopting?
Well, I move we adopt the agenda.
One sec. Do we want to move new business before old business so that if our guests would like to leave, they do not have to sit through all of our old business?
Questions about what the information for the old business.
Not particularly based on the agenda, I don't believe.
Well, are people here in
Any
the
preference?
city to make a presentation or
Yes.
help us understand this?
Yeah, so the new business Roundabout Canopy coverage update is what Rebecca and Katie are here to speak with us about tonight.
Sounds like a good idea then. We should move that forward probably.
Great. So we're going to swap 8 and 9 on the agenda and move new business before old business after reports and announcements. Any other thoughts or comments on the agenda?
I move adoption as modified. Second.
Any objections? Okay, sorry, all in favor?
Aye.
Any objections? Great, it is adopted. Approving minutes, our May 6th meeting minutes. Any notes or edits?
I have one question. Is there a listing of the minutes?
There's another copy right here.
We're good.
There was mention of the urban forest master plan, and I was just wondering is that the same thing as the community forest management plan, or is that something different?
What line is that, Richard?
I'm sorry, that
48.
page 3, line 48.
I think our reference there was to the urban forest, community forest management plan. Yeah.
Good catch. Anything else?
The only other thing we talked about, taking the need for permits for holly and cherry laurel off the need for that. But maybe we could just bring that up again and see if we can, recommend going forward with that. I just hate to see that get lost.
Would you like to ask for the update? Can that be added into the minutes from last time?
Yeah, what section was that on? Work plan?
I think so, if I remember correctly. Do you recall when in the conversation was?
Fairly early, so we talked about somebody complaining about having to get a permit to take out a holly tree. And it was said that it's only a level 1 permit, but still. And then I'd mentioned that at the 5 acre woods that had come up also because there's some big holly trees there as well.
It was probably in the event recap section then,
Maybe so.
as a response to feedback from the community at that event.
So I got educated about that a little bit today. The same thing we were talking about, I think, but Black Locust Grove. And so it was Christie clarified for me that there is a permit required, I guess, for the holly trees. But it would be a minor permit it would be the trees, the number of trees would not be limited to 2.
Never limited to 2. So, it's a minor permit when any number of invasive species are proposed for removal. It does become a major tree permit only if environmentally critical areas are. But otherwise, our code states if more than 2 trees are proposed, it becomes a major automatically. For invasives, it doesn't matter how many.
And that's significant trees.
Significant, yeah, 6 inches diameter up to 23.
So you're recalling a conversation where we talked about eliminating the idea of eliminating a permit altogether,
Yeah,
which would be another matter. I'm not sure we discussed up to this point.
yeah.
Probably just something we might want to consider in the future.
We can make a note to put that on the agenda for next month if we want to discuss if there are things, the scope of if we want to make a proposal on having some, whether it's invasives or some specific list of trees that are exempt from permits entirely, if we want to explore that possibility.
That's the only issue I see with that is people will then start traipsing through environmentally critical area, just removing canopy coverage
Yeah.
because it's invasive. At least we can capture that and give it that critical area kind of lens by requiring a permit, even if it's invasive.
Requiring a replacement.
Requiring a permit, even though
Permit,
it's
yeah.
invasive.
So the other thing I guess that we get lost would be the idea of replacement trees, which are with the permit would
Yeah.
establish and.
So I
We
would,
could.
sorry,
Yeah,
I
would
would,
want to.
I would
Yeah.
gently point out, you're in the section where you're approving the minutes.
Correct.
There is a section later on where you're setting the agenda for the next meeting, and I
Yeah.
think that this conversation would be better fit there.
Thank you. Anything else on the minutes from last month? Motion to approve?
Motion to approve the minutes as amended. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, minutes approved. Public comments. Would any of our guests like to make any public comments?
I have several comments, but actually, I was hoping maybe before the end, because. Well,
I think this could be the point, Jim.
right here.
Oh, it's at the chair's prerogative. If you want to add a second or if you want to table public comments until the end of the meeting, you're able to do that.
Is it related to one of our future topics or?
Yes, it has to do with, there's a neighbor that was trying to get a permit and a drone flew over from the city and said that, oh, you cut down a tree and 2 trees. One was a dead cherry tree and the other one was a Bedelia invasive. And so then now they can't get a permit in order to do this project that they have until they mitigate that. I'm not sure how they're gonna do that by putting some other tree in there. How do you mitigate something that, like, you have to plant a small tree? And is that future covered? What is that? And I didn't realize that the city flies drones either. So I don't know, I just want to learn about that. See if there's anybody has any comments about that. And also the ivy on the trees, but it's my big thing about ivy on the trees. Either this group or council needs to get on board with that, figure out a way that this city is going to be covered. Still doing, so anyway, I'd like to discuss those on something, but I didn't want to bring it up.
We can,
for that for time available.
Yeah, I would like.
Rather than
Yeah.
take up time.
so we can have a second opportunity for further public comment at the end with any time remaining. Thank you for the context on it. Would either of you like to make any other public comments at this point on the agenda?
No comments from me. I would say that the biggest issue on my mind right now is the impending axe to fall for the Sound Transit tree permit. And I am unsure a lot of the details on that. There's been talk of now allowing them to bundle a large number of permits, sound like maybe they were, but my specific concern is managing the mitigation. And Christine and I talked at the Green Fair about a program in Seattle where if there is not on-site mitigation or local mitigation, like with the roundabouts, and that's gonna go into Horizon View. Certainly the parks could benefit, we have a lot of riparian zones that could benefit, but whether or not the code currently allows a clear path for off-site mitigation on private property. And the program that SPU has in Seattle that allows homeowners to effectively sign up to be on a list to be receptive to receiving a tree. And whether or not we could, knowing this application is coming, I don't know what needs to happen at code level, but even if we just began to generate a list of willing property owners that if this does go into some negotiation or something, that we could say, well, here we have this opportunity rather than planting trees farther off site or some other kind of mitigation. I don't know a lot of details about the status of it, but I think in general, if we're to protect our canopy cover and particularly to enhance the tree poor areas of our city, like the Southern Gateway, where there is opportunity, but I don't think any people there know that there could be any mechanism where someone has to be paying for trees or bonding to keep trees healthy. You know, I for one would be willing to knock on doors down there and see if there were, especially a couple property owners together, where we could potentially even think about trying to establish a grove of trees. Because they don't have the kind of cover that we have. And I think we kind of owe it to them as our southern city neighbors.
Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to say in response, or? Is that-
I could give the council perspective. So there is a section in the code, it's 16.14.040, which does address the tree replanting in right of ways. So when trees are removed in a public right of way, such as with the Roundabout project or 522, there is a hierarchy. And so the first priority is to replant trees in the work area. Second priority, there's a map that has some zones that have low canopy. Southern Gateway, the northeast corner, the northwest corner of the city. And then the third would be just sort of, other options. And so this would be approved by the urban forest planner. I do think the code is silent about public versus private. And so I think this is something I flagged with our community development director as to what that, are there hurdles that the city council needs to address? Does silence mean if public and private are both okay? Does silence mean only public? So getting some clarity on that. But the intent of the council was that trees could be replanted in those low canopy zones. Like that was the intent of the council. Whether we need to revise the code to make that clear, that was definitely the intention when we passed this a couple of years ago.
And it would take the 3 touches to get it in code.
Oh, I mean, if it's
Explicitly, is it worth?
If it's urgent, we can speed the process along. I think the first step would be going to our community development director and urban forest planner to get some clarity on what does the code currently allow.
Right.
Actually, I would turn it over to our urban forest planner. Do you happen to know, or is this a question to talk to Mark about?
I believe it would be a question to talk to Mark about. I mean, I feel like you basically just summed it up. Right now, we haven't received any permits from Sound Transit. I have no idea what they're going to propose. I'm very interested to hear where they are attempting to replant these trees, and then move forward from there. Yeah.
And they could chop the heck out of us and offer a bunch of unrestricted money to something even more creative with. I don't know. My biggest concern about the permits right now is from the data I've seen, and it's a lot. I can't say I've seen all of it, but the tree inventory that they did is known to have some significant flaws. And it looks to me like all of that data is 6 years old. And although the code doesn't specifically speak to a time frame for tree inventories, I believe the industry standard is not more than 2 or 3 years old data. And like I said, I think most of their data is 6 years old. And it's sometimes the case that people will put a cover letter on data and resubmit it. And it will be accepted as the tree inventory and it's dated 2025, 2026, but the cover letter is cover letter on old data. That doesn't mean best available science. And the best I know of what the city code addresses on that is to say that they have to comply with the best available science. The best available science is clear that a 6-year-old tree inventory generally isn't considered adequate. My defer to Christie, she knows way more about this stuff than me.
Only been here for 3 months, but
My
yeah.
understanding though is that once those permits are received, it'll be part of your job to
Oh,
make
God.
sure that they are
Yeah.
correct in what they are saying they are pulling out.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
Yeah.
if they are submitting
yeah,
incomplete or incorrect
Yeah.
permit
Sure.
information, that is something that will
and
be.
it's kind of strategic that I haven't really given this too much thought, because there's nothing to review yet. But once they come in, I'll hit the ground running, and I'll treat it just like any other tree
If
permit
it
review.
would bear, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I'm sorry. If it would bear clarification and council could clarify that best available science with respect to tree inventory would be no more than 3 years old, for example. Then we should try and get that in place, because my understanding is the day the permit is accepted, they're then grandfathered for the code at the time of the permit. We can't be changing the code after they submit the permit.
When they submit the permit, it just begins the review process. And that's when I would review and say, oh, this looks like a 6-year-old inventory that I'm working off of, and then make a decision from there to see if that's viable or not.
I was just saying, if it bears clarification and the council could make that provision explicit in the code, then they couldn't come back and say, well, your code doesn't require that. That's not the way we read it. I'm borrowing trouble on purpose.
What I can say is our general, you're right, it's not in the code, an expiration date for reports. But typically in our department, we tend to stick to 5 years. If it's older than 5 years, generally we're like, this is too outdated. We need a newer report if it's older than 5 years. That's our general.
So then the city's policy is 5 years, which is.
Yes. So
I'm
since this
curious
is
where the
6
5
years,
came from, do you know what the 5 years is based on?
it's just our general policy. It's not written down, it's not in the code, but that's just kind of our general.
So that's exactly what I'm afraid of. If it is 5 years, I mean, it seems.
Wouldn't it be the case of whatever submitted would be taken as of the date it's submitted? Whether it was written 5 or 6 years ago, or whether it was written yesterday,
No.
it would still need to be verified and truthed, tested and regardless of when it was actually proposed. When it comes to the city, it's considered, I would think, it's considered current, and now it has to be reviewed and
And
checked.
the city can require them to verify, especially since citizens have complained that their trees are mischaracterized. But that means the city has to have the stomach to stand up to that. And I was just thinking it's nice to basically give them the platform to stand on. It's clear if we were to clarify, do a little research, best available science says this many years old, and consider even trying to get that in. Just a thought.
I just wonder if that would limit the city though, because they could say, hey, this is a 3-year-old, or you have to accept it. The city would say, well, but it's not accurate, so we can't accept it.
It should, because I mean, if it's more than 3 years old, it's not current. If it's inaccurate, it's inaccurate. And they're really apples and oranges. They're different things.
Yeah.
I agree, but it seems like the inaccurate would be the test that the city would be doing. If there was data that was inaccurate, regardless of whether it was 1 day old or 10 days old, the city would be.
Right.
Well, if the city has to have the temerity to ask for access to private property to check it, or, you know, to be able to verify whether or not it's accurate, how much manpower do we have for that? We can require them to do it, and it's sound transit, right, to say, no, we don't need to.
Describing my everyday life.
Yeah.
Just trying to make the
Yeah.
case as clear and straightforward about what
Yeah.
it is and isn't acceptable. If that's meritorious to spend time or spend council time clarifying some of these things. That's all.
I'm going to move us forward in the agenda if that's okay. Thank you for raising the concerns, raising suggestions. It sounds like they've been noted from council and staff on considering what are we going to do when all of those permits land in our lap, and are there things that we should be doing to be proactive and preparing for it? So, thank you. Next section is going to be moving on to reports and announcements. Do we have any generally city and council new information, reports, or announcements?
Did bring to pass around the article that Stacy wrote, right?
Love it,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh, good.
So I want to pass that around. It's like in this little green rectangle near the centerfold. I think those hit the mailbox, maybe, or hit the, maybe not your mailboxes, but went out today. Yeah.
Excellent. Fantastic, love to see this section is on tidy. Awesome, is this a new format mailer? that's
Brand
going out?
new, yeah.
Awesome, I was gonna say, I feel like this is not something that I'm
Yeah.
used to seeing come into my mailbox.
Yeah.
It's not very nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
Text Kyle's.
Oh,
I don't know if everybody got to see Kyle's art too. We printed out an example of it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes.
Fun.
Yes, Kyle submitted, sent this around via email to board members today. There's a color version as well. So we now have a supplemental item that we can use in, that would be great to have handouts at our events.
That'd make a cool sticker.
Say
it.
Interesting.
Yes.
Why do we leave the upper vines in?
Mostly because they're hard and dangerous to get out of the tree. So they will die off as long as you cut off all of their connection to their
Sometimes you can pull bark off the tree too if
Yeah.
you go on it, damage.
damaging to the tree.
But we make the second fold.
Silence.
I will note, partially for the recording, Kyle had to step out. We still have quorum, right? What's our number? No number.
Well, don't we have 8 people? Up to 5?
Do we have 8? Is that true?
I'm sorry.
Kind of.
Mindy.
How many tree board members are there in total?
Yes.
That's correct. So there are 8.
So 5 would be a quorum, so. Yeah,
Okay.
1, 2,
We have 4 of
3,
us now.
4. And is anybody online that's tree board member?
What does that mean for our meeting? Folks who know these rules better than I do.
I think it means we can talk, but we can't make decisions.
So the conservative interpretation is meeting disbanded, everyone has to go home. The less conservative interpretation is you can't take any votes on anything. But technically, this means you don't have a quorum. And so you can have any discussions you want because it's not a quorum. So I think gathering information, providing feedback, my interpretation is that's fine.
Sounds right to me too.
Great, so we can proceed, but can't make any formal decisions for the rest of the evening.
Don't spend
Not
any
sure.
money.
Something come up with Kyle if you had to leave.
Yeah, you have to step out.
Something must have come up with Doug, but I'm sure I saw it pulled up that he would be here if he. Sure.
I'm sure.
So I suppose the meeting minutes will say that at 7:30, the meeting was adjourned due to lack of quorum. But I see no harm in, since it's already being recorded, I see no harm in recording this informal discussion.
And we can't have a quarrel, just to be clear. Why did Ross think?
I haven't.
I know, you two can't sit next to each other. It's rubbing off.
So, not really tree related, but just a few general city announcements. The first is that, there was, I think it was a pretty successful town hall meeting a few weeks ago at Third Place Commons. I think some of you attended that. That's, so basically it was a big Q&A session, and I think there was enough interest that we might try doing it again. The second is our police chief, Mike Barton, has retired. I believe that was at the end of May. And so we have an interim police chief now, Commander, or now interim chief Diego Zanella. We'll be searching for a new permanent police chief. And then the third is we're still working on the budget. Based on, nothing, the council hasn't taken any formal votes, but we have been discussing a potential levy, very similar to the one that we ran last year, which failed. And so it does seem more likely than not that we'll be trying again with a public safety levy in November. But yeah, those are some basic updates from the city.
Thank you.
An addendum to Chief Harden's retirement, there's a party tomorrow, Friday afternoon.
Friday, 6 to 8, Animal Acres Park.
Well, that's fun.
Any other news or announcements from city staff? Sounds good. Okay, we can move on to Roundabout Canopy coverage. Floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Give me a moment, please, while I share my screen and get my presentation up.
I love the name, the Roundabout sheet. It's like, how did those guys make the?
Do you have an extra one of those?
These?
Yeah.
It's in the.
Maybe one can send it.
Where are these gonna go?
Did you have a printed packet at your seat?
Oh, here's an extra.
Maybe.
Sorry.
Sorry.
There you go.
Yes, it's also available in the packet. That's well, you don't have a laptop though, so.
Right.
So, thanks everybody for having me and Rebecca here at this meeting tonight. I'm sure that most of you know a lot about the roundabout, but I'll just go into a little bit of info for people that may not know about the roundabout project that this city is doing. So at the intersection of 104 40th and Northeast 184th, right now that's a stop controlled intersection. If you're familiar with the city, you've probably driven through it and you've noticed it. And for quite a long time now, the city has been planning on putting a roundabout there and working on design. And a year ago, we finished our design and bid the project publicly and advertised it. And we received bids and we selected a contractor. We got that contractor on board. And we've started all the planning that you have to do before construction actually starts. So this right here is a graphic of what the intersection will look like once the roundabout has been built. And just one thing I want to point out about this graphic is that the areas that are like green with like little brown speckles, that's landscaping. And then the areas that are brown with kind of gray stripes, that's stamped concrete. And you'll see on some of my other slides that is not entirely represented. And that's because our contract plans had things that were just a little bit different than what we're doing today. So just so you don't get confused about those details, I wanted to point that out now. But this is what the roundabout will look like when it's done. And all right, so a little bit of background. As part of the design for the roundabout, the footprint of the roundabout is larger than the footprint of the street that's there right now, 104 and the streets that join up with it. It's going to get bigger, the footprint. And if you've driven through the site, you've probably seen that it slopes upward. So the whole portion where it will become roundabout, that will have to be graded. That means like flattened out. And all trees and everything that's in this round area will be taken out, necessitated by the construction. And so all of the trees that the project will remove this has been something we've been planning and working on for years with our former urban forest planners and with our consultant arborist team. And we've made a plan to replace the canopy loss from all of those trees in Horizon View Park. And it came to our attention. I believe that, you know, the tree board spoke up and you know, wanted to be brought into the mix a little bit. So that's why we're doing this now. But since that happened in the last couple months, our contractor did discover that there's one more tree that we need to remove, and it's pictured here. It's a Douglas fir. It is an exceptional tree, 44 is the diameter. So it's a pretty big tree. Sorry, it's like I can't really show much of the tree because it's so big. So all the zoomed out pictures have tons of other trees in the picture. So here's my zoomed in picture of this tree. And you can see that the driveway that's adjacent to the tree, there's root intrusion and it's coming up. Anyway, what I'll tell you is this driveway belongs to a resident that lives on the roundabout. And as part of our project, regrading everything, flattening, all the driveways that currently attach to the road sort of have to also be regraded so that it's not just a steep drop off. So her driveway is going to be redone as part of this project. And when we redo her driveway, unfortunately, we won't be able to avoid harming this tree's root system, which is why it does need to be removed. And we went over this with our last urban forest planner and now again with our new one. But this tree, I think I need to go to the next slide. Yeah, okay, so the map on this slide shows you where that tree is located. It's on private property by her driveway, and when we remove it, we're gonna need to add back in 962 square feet of canopy. Because that's how much canopy we're losing by removing the tree. And because of the feedback that we got from tree board, thank you for that. And also because it aligns with our city code, we want to replace that canopy on the site of the roundabout project. And we want to do it within the city's right of way. And this sort of came up earlier in the meeting, but just to let you know how this topic relates to the roundabout plan and what we're doing is we are planting many trees as part of our construction for the roundabout on private property, and none of those trees are being counted towards our canopy replacement. So the trees that are being counted towards our canopy replacement need to be on city property. So Horizon View Park, and then this other area that I'm going to show you within the right of way.
So there's, sorry, Kate, can I ask?
Yeah.
So that total number we saw in this report, the total square footage of canopy replacement is all public?
The number at the end, the
Yeah.
15,000 number?
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that canopy is within city right of way or in the parks that we own.
Why
So-
can't you count the part that's on private land?
Because of our code, we're not allowed to count that. Do you want to elaborate on that at all?
That sounds accurate.
Yeah, that's just what our code says, so. You know, even though this is a city project, we did have to take out permits for everything, not just tree permits. And we have a tree permit for all the work we're doing, and as per that tree permit and our city code, we're only counting canopy that's countable.
And to tie this back into what I said earlier, I think this is something council may want to revisit, you know, was it the intention of the council that passed this 2 years ago to say that it can only be replanted in public rights of way? Or if you plant a bunch of these trees in people's yards, should that count towards the canopy coverage? And I think we'll have to see the code that we passed. Is it clear? Is it ambiguous? Does it need to be cleaned up to meet the intent of the council? So I think it's something council is going to be coming back to. But also if the tree board has a view on that, obviously you can't make a formal recommendation tonight, lack quorum. But if the tree board wanted to add this to your agenda for July, what are the tree board's thoughts on should trees replanted on private property count towards the replacement.
Can I clarify, is it limited to counting trees planted on public property because they are coming off of public property?
This one's coming off
Or-
of private property.
But if I apply for a permit to take a tree off of my private property, I replant on my private property. But is
You
it,
would.
is it because it's the city applying, or is it because the other trees are coming off of,
Interesting
like?
question, because this Doug fir that's currently providing 962 square feet on private property, shouldn't that 962 square feet go back onto her private property? Why are we proposing to put that
Well,
onto city property?
we're not, we are putting trees back on her property, but we're
Yeah.
not counting any of that. And we're not putting this extra 962 on her property because it wouldn't be countable. And our numbers still have to add up.
So this is gonna get wonky, but reading the code that we adopted a few years ago says that the right-of-way corridor means the public right-of-way plus the area within 500 linear feet on either side. Does that mean 500 linear feet in total, or does it mean the portions of the 500 feet that are also public rights of way? And I think this is where there is some ambiguity in the code, and how staff is interpreting it may not align with what council's intention was 3 years ago. So that's why I think the council should try to clear this up, and whichever way we go, we should make it clear what that actually means.
And if the idea is that canopy is great for the environment, does it really matter where it is planted as long as it's planted?
I think people who apply for tree permits would beg to differ. I require them to replace it on their private property and or in their right of way. That 500, like the adjacent.
Question?
But doesn't the code make a clarification for priority, like on-site adjacent?
When homeowners remove a tree from their private property, they don't get to plant it in a park.
And that brings up another thing I was gonna bring up too, that our next door neighbors, the Merkleys, have 75 huge trees on their property. And they just had a couple dead trees that were asked to replant, but there's really not any room to replant. And actually, the guidelines I was reading about tree density say that it's not healthy for the forest if you have canopy that is so close together that it's 40% of the height of the tree or less. And so that's something I think that we maybe need to talk about some more, that because there are some yards that have so many trees that it doesn't make any sense to try to plant more there, but they'd be more than happy to plant in somebody else's
They would
yard.
only need to replant if the removal takes them below their canopy coverage requirement for their property, correct?
Yeah, and only related to major permits.
Because these,
So if
they weren't
there's-
asked to replant.
If there's still enough canopy coverage on their property that they meet the minimum requirement, they
Yes, they-
would not be required to replant.
Okay, because they've got about 80% coverage, so.
And just to
Probably good.
clarify, that the standards for public and private are different. For private, if someone removes a tree, it's only triggered if it puts them below the percentage that's required for their zone. For public, it has to be a one-to-one replacement.
Yeah.
So it's a bit different standards.
Something I haven't heard here yet is, you're taking 962 feet of canopy away, but what are you replacing with a smaller tree?
I think that's because we interrupted in the middle of the presentation.
Yeah, I have a lot more to tell you.
Let's keep going, and if we have questions at the end of the presentation,
You
dig in.
may interrupt at any time if I'm going too fast or if you have questions, it's okay.
Okay, it's coming up.
All right, so this next slide has an awful lot of information on it. But what I'll say is that the drawing in the background, so to speak, that's mostly black and white. That is one of our contract plans, and that represents the condition on the site today. So that doesn't show the roundabout, that shows 40th, 184th, and SR 104 as they are today. And it's useful because it shows a little bit of the grade. If you ever look at plans that have grades, you can tell that it's steep on that northeast corner there going up. And then just to sort of give you a frame of reference, the image on the left that shows the roundabout with the star on it, that is showing you the location of the future roundabout where we're looking at on this map. And then the image on the right, let me just there's something covering it on my screen. Let me move this. The image on the right is zoomed in a little bit, and that's meant to show you that we found this area on the site of the future roundabout that's in the shaded green. Where there is room to plant trees, and it would work out for all the rest of what we have planned, utilities, etc. And just to also show you, there are 5 trees that are represented sort of by the star shapes that are staying, and then there's some other trees that are underneath the red oval that the project will need to remove. So just so you can envision what this little swatch of land will look like at the end of the project, that's what that's showing you. And then I have this area, let's see, blown up a little bit more on the next slide. This is what that same area will look like after roundabout construction. So that is 40th Place Northeast coming down towards the roundabout. And the area that's green there, again, is that area where we're proposing to plant some trees and add in some canopy. And, you know, we think that 2 or 3 trees would fit nicely in there. And then those numbers that I have listed at the bottom, that was pointed out earlier in my presentation. These are the numbers for the total project. So the reason I'm coming here today is just to give you an update on all the canopy numbers, but this is telling you everything. When we originally designed this project, the design finished a year ago. The canopy that we were going to remove was about 15,000 square feet. And then we were going to replace it with about 15,000 square feet of canopy in Horizon View Park. Today, we're removing an additional 962 square feet. So that means the additional canopy we need to require when you go through all the numbers is just about 1,100 square feet of canopy.
So that's the only one tree that's gonna be replanted, that is gonna be replaced on site.
Yeah,
Did I just miss something? No.
yes, you got it.
Okay, so the one tree anyway, will be a replanting on the site of the roundabout. The bulk of the replacements
Yes,
are in Horizon.
yes, you got it.
So these numbers are 30 years from now of what they're gonna be? Because, you know, we're planting small trees, replacing huge ones.
Yeah, so the way it works, so I also have, this is the general tree list for Lake Forest Park. So all of these numbers, they weren't like made up by the roundabout team. This is part of Lake Forest Park's tree list. And every tree that's listed on this list here has a canopy area. And that is not the canopy area on the day it's planted. It's the canopy area
In 30 years.
in 3 years. Yeah.
Okay, so
So, we met with Christy and we talked about this a lot, and we looked at the tree list together, and we had some things that we wanted to take into consideration. Since this is right by a roadway with like a whole lot of stormwater facilities and other utilities, we wanted trees that don't shed a lot of debris, sap shedding. Of course, all trees do, but we wanted to keep it to less of that, less root intrusion, you know, not too tall. And these are the 6 trees that we came up with. And it shows each of them, I've listed off the canopy coverage that each tree would give. So essentially, we're coming here tonight to talk to the tree board, and I understand since there's no quorum, we can't make any decisions. But maybe this can just be food for thought for the time being. And if this is recorded, does that mean that other tree board members will watch it at a later date potentially?
They are able to, and if there's a specific portion that we want to request that they watch for future conversation, I can certainly send out an email requesting.
Yeah, I think that would be useful if that's acceptable to the tree board, because we do want to, you know, make a choice about what trees we're going to put in that area. Yes,
are any of these native?
they all are. Yeah, they're
They're all
from
native?
or Christy,
They're-
you
they're-
answer.
Sorry, no, they're not.
Oh, okay, they're not.
No, unfortunately, native tree selection didn't kind of meet those parameters of minimizing debris, shedding, root intrusion, and height. So these were all selected based off within those parameters.
So 40-inch for be replaced canopy wise, but not half a decade.
Yeah, we go off of canopy coverage.
Well, the short pine is a native tree. Right?
Oh, yep.
It's done.
Not around here.
No,
Great.
No, we have
Anyway,
the
I'll
east,
say
we have the
It's
eastern
one that's
white pine.
recommended for this
Yeah.
area by.
Yeah.
But I don't know
Yeah,
that's-
yeah, people you mean.
Yeah.
But so, for example, if short pine was selected, you need two of them.
Three.
Three of them, yeah.
Yeah, we were envisioning that the selection wouldn't be multiple of the same type, that it would be a variety, but we're also totally open to whatever the tree board thinks makes sense for the trees.
I'm guessing Doug will have lots of thoughts on this slide,
Oh,
and he
okay.
is not with us tonight. He is our resident tree expert.
Oh, okay, okay.
So I'm guessing he will have lots of thoughts on what may be a good fit or a recommendation.
Yeah, I guess, Christy, maybe you could just help us understand.
Yeah.
Obviously, you picked these because of the parameters.
Yes.
But is there a certain like combination of these that would work?
I mean, there's a lot of value in conifers, evergreens, so I think I would kind of lean towards those. Also, they have less shedding. They do shed still, but significantly less. Those deciduous trees are selected because they have very inconspicuous, tiny little flowers and no fruit. So that was kind of what I was going for. I think the incense cedar would be a really great option. It's a different genus than our native Western red, but very, very similar.
It does say the short pine is native to the
Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
So you could get there with an incense cedar and a short pine.
Definitely could.
Catcher's Asian.
That's very interesting.
I'm impressed by the detail of this. It's very thorough.
It's important.
I mean, we prefer natives, but it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that if there's
Yeah.
a non-native, that's not a good tree, right? Or a
Yeah.
good tree in the right place.
Right. Yeah, right tree, right place, definitely. And I kind of going back to that, and Jean, you mentioned it. Native trees are required to be selected when a native tree is removed in critical area. That's the only time that we can mandate that and bust out the code and
Just
require that.
caterpillars. As that first, giving some real urban habitat. And it's that all that urban habitat, right?
Large bowls with the dry areas, not wet
I
areas.
think we can move on since you guys can't make a legitimate decision today. We were kind of hoping for that, but
Yeah, I guess maybe we can just touch base in the days to come, just
Yeah,
to see if the other members of the tree board want to weigh in, and then ultimately maybe they can give their recommendation to Christy and or me or both of us.
yeah.
When is the recording generally posted? Not gonna lie, I've never got to look at one of the recordings after the meeting. When will it generally be posted?
We usually post them like Thursday or Friday.
Okay, great.
But if we choose, it seems like the tree board together has to choose, make a choice. That we can't do it by watching the thing online.
Are you looking for a consensus, formal decision, formal recommendation from the tree board, or are you just looking for input from individual members who are interested in providing input?
I think that we were looking for input, and if the tree board doesn't want to hold this decision and they want to just give all of their input to me and Christy, and then I won't decide, but I would let Christy decide since she knows this stuff. We could do it that way too.
Is our July meeting too late to have a formal conversation?
Yes.
Okay. So it sounds like our option for this time around is that we can figure out either I or Christy or Elizabeth can email the tree board members, and then what is the deadline by which you would like folks to contact the two of you with any thoughts?
Well, I would say a week or two is about as long as we'd want to stretch this decision, so if people could give some feedback, and even if people don't want to watch the whole recording, I understand watching a recording is not really what you want to do when you're sitting at home, but if this slide presentation could just be shared, or even just this one I don't know if that might be an
Absolutely.
easy way to solicit feedback quickly. Maybe,
Well, I'm prepared to offer my feedback now. I mean, I think if I would do it in generalities, I would say that I certainly just, my feeling is that native is what we would be our preference. That said, I trust our professional arborist. What would be nice for the tree board to get is when the decision is made, if we could just have some brief description of why, to say, we chose these, these two and these three, and here is why we chose this combination and in these places. That would just be useful to understand, just from a, from a learning standpoint.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents.
Do your bylaws let you approve things by email though?
So,
Email is not allowed. It needs to be a public meeting, and email is not a public forum.
Got it.
Related to that, to avoid what's called a serial meeting, it's important that tree board members not talk to each other about this. And so if Katie sends out a request, just offer feedback, you would be offering feedback directly to Katie as individuals, not as the tree board.
Yep.
And then Katie and Christy would take that feedback as individuals.
but we can talk about, like Ross and I can talk about trees.
Yes,
That's
you can have your own small group meetings as long as it doesn't go beyond 5.
Right. As long as
Beyond
it's not-
4.
Yeah, beyond 4.
since we're just looking for feedback and not a formal choice, is it okay if we do the informal emailing?
I suspect the answer is yes. You probably want to touch base with either Mark or our city clerk just to kind of just make sure.
Okay.
I
We
suspect,
can email with you individually, we can't email as a group with you. So I am happy to send out an email as soon as the recording is posted saying, here is the recording. We talked about this topic. If anyone would like to provide feedback, reply directly to Katie and Christy, not to this whole group. That is allowable, correct, Larry?
yes, generally don't reply all.
Yes.
Okay.
So don't reply all, reply directly to the two of you, and anyone is welcome to chime in directly to you.
Well, my feedback is that I'm happy to go with your recommendation.
Okay.
I know Doug was the most passionate about wanting to hear about what plans are, what options are, and discuss things, so. I'm guessing you'll hear from.
Trees that fit the site, do you think that the site and work there and are gonna be viable there? I would leave it fine with myself.
Excellent.
Yeah, same here.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or clarifications from the presentation?
It's not directly related, but Katie, I'll round my knowledge out. So for the roundabout project, there was private property that is being taken or consumed as part of this, right? And so when you talk about the trees being taken down on private property, that is the property that's still private first.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes, thank you for that clarification.
thanks.
Anything else? Related to this topic?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us and just for sharing all of that information. Thank you to, is it Rebecca, right?
Yes.
Online.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Y'all are welcome to stay for the rest of our informal discussion, or you're welcome to take off.
I think I'm gonna take off. Thank you. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the hard work.
Thank
You
you.
guys been at this for a long time.
Yes.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming.
I'm not related to them, but.
We
You
can
guys aren't
sit
allowed to
together.
talk either.
And we can move on to other old business. If there are any of these, I think most of this is just kind of updates and general conversation. So KCD, any new word on getting our map?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. I emailed right after last meeting.
Okay.
They're working on it. We are in a queue. I
Yeah,
think that's kind of kind of
What are we
deal.
talking about here?
We're talking, you wanted to add streams,
Yeah,
that's gonna cost, and
it costs $500, right?
Yep.
I think that's right.
And from Mark's conversation at the last meeting, it sounds like
We've,
you mentioned 70,000 in our funds that wasn't gonna be spent now. It sounded to me like $500 to get some valuable information would be very feasible. That's why that was what I took away. But you've been in touch with Ellen, I guess, about that?
yeah, yes, we actually saw Ellen at the tree equity workshop a couple weeks ago, and she was like, talk to Mark, wanted to add streams. I was like, yes, but she informed me it would be an additional cost. I was like, yeah, that's what we thought it was gonna be. And it kind of, this predates my time here, but it was agreed upon amongst all of y'all to decide on kind of what you wanted to see out of that. I think we went with what kind of neighboring cities, kind of the same layers that they provide. We kind of matched those, I think. I don't think so. I don't know. Streams wasn't added at that time, so
Right.
and I don't know the feasibility of adding it at this point.
So this would give us an assessment of canopy coverage on our major street
Is this
system.
a GIS map you're buying from King County?
Yeah, we've provided them with our GIS shape files, and they'll add it to the tree plotter through Planet. It's Planet Geo tree plotter. It's accessible on the internet for anybody to view.
It's just the foundation did the Salmon Guide to Lake Forest Park with the streams and wetlands 20 years ago, and have done updates, and you wouldn't know this because it's just internal right now, but we just finished updating it and also developed a GIS one. And we have a tree layer on it that's not complete, but we can't have access to the King County data because that's for the city, but I would be very happy to share with y'all the version we have, which is probably not as robust as King County, but if there's anything there that you can use, we have copyright on it, but it's open for anybody that wants to use it, can use it. And then also the Climate Hub is doing a GIS layered map of the whole city. They have a grant from the geological.
Sorry.
They have geologist consultants working for the grant for them. And they've been trying to get Canopy, so there's 3 different King County probably is, I'm just offering, if there's anything we can do to help, we're happy to show you what we got.
I wonder if
wherever.
or if that would kind of meet what you're looking for.
Well, it sounded like, I thought that we already, the city had the GIS information that we needed. That was my understanding. We just didn't request it. We requested wetlands. And some of us, I particularly thought that was going to include streams.
Christy or Elizabeth, can you make me a participant so I can share my screen?
Yes.
So
I'm a nativity right now. Thank you.
well, anyway, I'd just be interested in how we're able to move forward on that. We could involve Mark some more, or probably needs to make a decision about going
I
ahead.
think it would go to
A
Phil.
contract modification or something.
Yeah, we don't decide what happens with that money. Not me, not Mark.
Does seem like streets would be important.
I think that'd be very important
So,
information, and if the
what we-
Stewardship Foundation is working on that too, I guess. That should be available to maybe alongside of whatever we have as a city.
That's the one that was posted down there for many years.
Well-
Outdated.
I want to be clear on what we've already asked of them. We included wetlands, is that correct?
Correct.
So that should be all of this. That should be everything that's currently on that map that is not grayed out.
Wetlands, I think park boundary and zoning.
Rivers and streams would give us effectively already the same information but less.
So
So
you have both layers, it's GIS, you can have as many layers as you want.
every layer requires is an additional $500. We can start with 4 custom, 3 custom, something like that. that we have already provided to them, and every additional layer that we get mapped onto into their tool is an additional $500.
For your,
It's not about getting the GIS data, it's about having them put the GIS data into their
The tree plotter.
interactive tree plotter
Yeah.
tool.
is that 500 per year?
No, for the one-time
At
setup.
one time.
So we do have like stream buffers that we could,
That what you're showing there.
but it is still, so it is basically the same as wetlands, but wider and
Yeah.
without the like
Yeah.
wetland areas.
I think it's 100 feet or something, maybe on either side of the street, so been a fairly wide riparian zone.
So Victoria, is your point that the stream data is included in what we've already asked for?
The rivers and streams data, there's a little bit that's different. You can see what's changing between those. So there is some that is not
That's-
included,
Yeah,
and then stream buffers would increase it.
and stream buffers, we don't.
Each of those would be, if we asked for rivers and streams or stream buffers, each would be another $500 out of our KCD funds.
And then, sorry, how big is the KCD fund again?
I'm guessing Christy would know the answer to that.
I'm sorry, say
How big is the KCD fund?
the total pot.
If the
What?
question is, do we have $500 in it?
We-
Yes, we
Yes,
do.
yes, there is. And we spent 4,500 for the tree plotter already.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we have, is there a budget, what's our total budget?
Don't quote me on
Okay.
this, but it's like 119,000, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
There was a good chunk of it that was supposed to go to a rain garden type of a project that has since been forgot abandoned. Thank you, because we lost our stormwater employee, specialist employee.
It's
So that 70,000 went back.
called a jurisdictional account. It's money that's already collected by KCD from property owners in Lake Forest Park. And it's for use in Lake Forest Park for environmental type projects.
I guess my thought is. If we were to add, I don't know, $500 or $1,500 in additional. It seems like that would be important information, could be really useful data to have. I mean, we do so much planning around our streams and our critical areas. Seems like not a huge price to pay to get, if it gives us, I guess what I don't know is, how much good data is that gonna give us? Right, it doesn't seem like it's that much money. I mean, it's not my money.
For one time.
Yeah, right, one time, Smith.
There's
We are not able to make any formal recommendation to ask for additional, to approve or ask for additional amount. Layers, so thank you for the update. I feel like there's not much more we can go over this evening, but
I would say, is there any time sensitivity to, if you were to add on this extra $500 to KCD? Is there a deadline that has to be done, or is it just sort of an informal, hey, this is in the pipeline, can you just, add on this a la carte?
That's what I was hoping to find out from Ellen Arnstein at KCD. If
And
we
was
could
she
still-
not able to,
If it's still feasible to add on another geography at this point.
what'd she tell you? Did you speak with her?
Well, I know she didn't get back.
Oh, okay.
yeah, I think she didn't reply to that.
For one reason or another.
Got you.
I would assume, I don't know without reaching out to them about this, but I would assume that you'd wanna do it before cause we're in a queue right now. Should probably add on what you want to now.
Right.
But like I said, me and Mark Hoffman are not able to just designate that money, on a whim.
We have to count by, but
Yes,
Something
the city
like that.
administrator would have to.
it's a trademark. Made an action that might influence.
So,
And do you see any issue with putting this on the July 1st meeting agenda?
We can
Good.
review it yet
Yeah.
again, see if it's made any progress. If it hasn't,
Yeah.
then we can.
I can again follow up with her unless you're gonna do that anyway, Christie, and see what the status of that, where we are in the queue.
I don't speak with Ellen about the queue. I speak with like the GIS technician with Planet Geo.
Planet Geo.
Mhm.
So if you want to follow up your unanswered email from Ellen to Ellen and just say,
Yes.
Dave's
yes.
just wondering, like you can
Yeah.
share that. Sounds like we're in a queue. We were just wondering, if we choose to recommend, adding another layer, is it too late to do that while we are in the queue?
Yeah, she probably would know. No. Let me know if you don't get any traction with
Yeah,
it.
she may refer to Planet Geo.
She could, yeah.
Okay. Any new information about tree giveaway stuff, Mark? Only if you were thinking about that
Oh,
for
gosh,
fall.
yeah, I have not been great at following up on that. I think that's kind of a holding pattern that they're in right now. You know, they did this big tree giveaway with 2,500 trees. 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 4 months ago. Anyway, they're gearing up. They want by July and August, they would like us to be able to tell them how many trees we want. I mean, I think we're in with them. They want to work with us. It's one of the cities that they work with. This is an organization called 300 Trees, right? And they do want to work with us. And I've been trying to. I sent them a note the other day just to try to get more information on what. One of the things they can do is actually plan and give an idea of what a tree giveaway program might look like. You know, what kind of location is good for distributing trees and what kind of publicity you want to put out and whether you would want to have an advanced registration or reservation or first come, first serve kind of thing. So I think we have time to get that information. Also, what kind of trees will they have available? Do they think they'll have it available for this giveaway? So they're gearing up for a big fall giveaway process involving at least several cities. And I think Bellevue will be a big thing, but some other cities too. So, to get ready for the planting season in the fall. Um, so I think it's just better trying to get those questions answered. And it may be that when we get that information, we can think more specifically about how we'd like to set it up. Would we want to use the city hall parking lot? How many trees? I don't think we're in the 2,500 tree range.
I doubt it.
200 trees or something. It might be a real accomplishment for us if we could do that.
A good starting point could be that list that you've kind of been accumulating of private homeowners who are interested in planting on their property.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a very,
Those are really people, so that's easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice for the.
Mhm.
That's.
Well, you certainly do it that way, and we could talk about it if just to have people call in or let us know that they would like a tree. And plan to pick it
Yeah.
up when they set it up.
You
advertising.
can have one big day, but you also, if you had extra trees, the water district has native plants in their parking lot. That people can come by at their convenience, pick trees, so get some extra trees, that would be a place they could go.
Right.
So
Yeah, right.
Trees, Mark,
Pardon me?
various kinds of trees.
There's only gonna be like 4 or 5 types, I think. We got a couple, the last time they did the giveaway. We got cascara, which is
That's a great tree.
it's a nice tree. We got a couple of those, we got a couple of show pines, and we got a couple of serviceberry trees. And those are waiting in my front yard to be distributed one way or another. So they'll be part of what we give away.
One more quick admin side note, could one of you, Kyle is now in the online, but is an attendee.
Got it.
If you can make him a panelist, thank you. Just so that in case Kyle would like to chime in with anything, you're able to unmute yourself officially.
I know.
Thank you.
Is the overlap between the Stewardship Foundation and the Tree Board? And we've helped each other many times, and we've also sometimes ended up at cross purposes because there's not enough communication. And it's a good opportunity to say that if there's gonna be a tree giveaway or anything of that sort, our newsletters intermittent, that's not a regular,
Yeah.
not a deadline. But if you please get that information to Kim, she's still, it's the.
Absolutely.
And then we can help promote that for you also.
Yeah,
To
absolutely.
Chairman.
Yeah, it's been a
Please-
huge
please
help
keep
to
us-
be able to nudge you guys when
keep
we
us
have
in
things
the
we want to
loop.
get out to the community.
Please, yeah.
Excellent. So it sounds like similarly in a holding pattern, waiting for kind of partners to move forward and get more information.
We're hoping to have some hope also, or some interest in conservation district giveaway program. And I know, was it Stacy was looking into that, or?
I believe so. The answer on that was that we were not able to do it this year. Missed the deadline for this year, but could talk to them about next year, possibly at a later date.
Is this a Ruth Land sale or separate?
Separate.
No, KCD has supported a number of local municipalities in doing tree giveaways.
But,
So
yeah,
we were
a bunch of projects.
reaching out to them to see, I think they did the Kenmore City Tree Giveaway and the Shoreline Community Trees program. So figuring out what they have set up for, like, is it just a plug and play program? Is it something that you have to buy into, et cetera?
One good opportunity is they have their bare root native plant sale each year. And in most years they have leftovers and you can get on the list for those. But
Okay,
you have to have the manpower to be able to retrieve the day of the sale. And they
Yeah.
have bare roots. And then you have to have like a work party to get them in dirt and, spread out native parts of the water. But you can pick up a lot of free trees and other native plants from them that are in good shape that way.
good to know. Do you know what time of year that sale is?
It's usually like February, March in the spring, which
Okay.
is a problem for planting trees, because it's not the time to plant them, but sort of spirits of the other things do okay, but. But they often, they don't know what they're gonna have left over, but sometimes they have lots left over and they'll give them away to organizations, and if you can't do it as a municipality, again, call the foundation, because we're a nonprofit, we can receive them if that's a better fit for their protocol, and they know us.
Yeah.
That stuff too. Yeah.
Excellent. Good to know. Added to our list of resources, some options. Anything else on tree giveaway? Next thing we had was a check-in on outreach. Exciting to see the Ivy article.
Yeah,
Thank you to the folks who helped get that in there and did editing to get it down to exactly the word count we were able to submit. And the paper copy of the Ivy graphic was circulated. Kyle, thank you so much for making that. It is beautiful. I think that would make, like I said earlier, an excellent piece to add to our outreach box. Have whether it's just a large version of that printed out on the table on display, whether it's small versions of that we have as a handout version, something like that.
it's almost a standalone article, because it is so descriptive of what you wanted to do to remove the ivy. I mean,
The article or the
I
graphic?
could see it if it had maybe a short paragraph describing the problem of ivy
Yeah.
that could accompany it, a QR code.
There's only a couple of things that
Maybe
in this Ivy thing that are mentioned. One is the fact that the rat problem, just Google rats and ivy. And the fact that ivy goes up the tree, rats get into the attic. The other thing is that not only do they strangle the tree, but they suck up the nutrients.
Yep.
And that would be something else to put in there, but I don't know if you've been along 28 there's a group of owners that have mitigated all the trees, the ivy and trees there. And some at their expense, others volunteer their own, so it's a project I think that needs really there. And this is a really great start here. I think this would be great.
Yeah, it'd be good to keep that theme going.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Continuing.
may I speak a little bit more on this?
Yeah, sure.
So there are three things that, that I think prevent people from doing the ivy. First, it's hard. And especially if you're elderly or something like that, so you have to have somebody else to do it. Second is you have to have a vehicle or something to get rid of it. And third, you have to pay $20 a ton minimum. That's a minimum of things, to dispose of it. So I know the city doesn't have a budget to do any ivy. But they do have a budget to clear the trees that fall in the road, and that happened on 28. So, I think it would behoove them to perhaps participate a little bit. And I might suggest that we have like a monthly ivy out program. And invite people to remove ivy and then put it by the roadside. And have the city come along and pick it up like they do at Grace Hole. Sure they do it at 5 acre as well, and they have these kick. I don't know how they dispose of it. But I think if we're gonna get a hold of this thing, it's taking over everywhere you go. It's just ridiculous, and we're gonna see some trees fall. So it's dangerous. So anyway, it's kind of like a little stump.
So the idea, Jim, just make, I'm sure I'm following, is that we direct city funds to periodically go out and collect
Yeah, if it's
because
by
that's-
the roadside, they can just pick it up off the thing and then they could dispose of it, but.
They could
Unless you
text an
get,
address,
I'm sorry.
they could text an address somewhere or.
Yeah, if somebody's gonna have a pile of.
Take up
ivy,
point.
figure it out. And, it's too much for our little bins that. It took 2 truckloads from a neighbor that, to haul off just in her backyard, and that's not happening. It's really amazing.
Asking the city to sign up on an ongoing basis is gonna be a little bit uphill. But you could build on the success of this lovely article. The foundation did a IVL mailer, postcard mailer. You guys around then, maybe, it wasn't that long ago. But we've been talking about maybe doing another postcard mailer. And just tossing out that this would be a lovely graphic on a postcard. This could be a collaboration between the tree board and the stewardship foundation. Maybe a paragraph or a barcode with more information than people want it, but maybe proposing one summer day, pick a Saturday or Sunday weekend. As like first part IVL weekend, asking the city for a one-time pickup of ivy, and if it's a rousing success, then
Making a
you
case.
could move to say, maybe we should do this again. Oh, maybe we should do this every month, maybe, to feel your way a little bit that way, just to see what kind of response you get from people, but it's a pain. Who feels like pulling ivy on a Sunday? Nobody
Yes.
like wakes up and says, "Oh boy, today's Ivy Day." Yeah.
Yeah, there's some people who
Do the
Yeah.
And in 5 acre wood, they have coffee and treats, so,
Yes.
but as an interim plan, since the city already picks up the IV at 5 acre and Grace Hole. What about us saying that it's okay for homeowners that take their IV to just take it to those piles that are already there, so the city doesn't have to drive out all.
What if there's a little bit of lamium seed in there, the archangel? And now you're just, I don't know, I'm hesitant to bring invasive weeds
You're
from
asking
place to
for-
place.
So what does the city do?
I don't know, I don't work for Public Works. I
Well,
think that's,
Another.
I think that's
I
Another
thought
thought.
maybe you're close to
It's a
that.
little bit more complicated, is that there is an onsite strategy for ivy. And KCD, I think it was KCD that did the instruction class on this, because there was a period of time where most everything at Grace Hole was being put, if you make a little bit of a structure and get it a certain number of feet off the ground and it dries in the sun, then it's safe and you retain the nutrients. You don't have to haul it, you don't have the gas and all that kind of stuff to deal with as well. But it's a little touchy, you need to do it properly. Amy was the pro at this, is what way back when, but it's hard with big volumes. But that's a sustainable.
Does anyone on this side of the room know what it would take to, or who we would talk to about potentially proposing a city pickup for ivy around?
Nova, The Public Works Director.
Okay.
I wanted to interrupt, since Kyle has rejoined us on Zoom, that means this is no longer an informal chat, since now there's 5 of you. So I think the best thing to do is for you to call the meeting back to order.
Okay.
It also gives you the opportunity, if you want to make an official tree board recommendation on either scope of the KCD maps or species of trees for the roundabout, you could make a formal recommendation. So I just wanted to make you aware of that.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Welcome back, Kyle, by the way. I hope everything's okay. And we'll formally reconvene the meeting yet again. I think this is like 4 or 5, something like that.
It's a record, I think.
So we are back to formally meeting. Thank you for that reminder, Larry. Appreciate it.
Well, I don't know how you want to handle it, Victoria, didn't jumping around too much, but I would like us to revisit the topic of the additional special geography for our ACD project.
So which of the geographies are you recommending that we add? Stream buffers or rivers and streams?
Rivers and streams, yes. Assuming that we have the GIS data for that, and maybe Stewardship Foundation would want to compare what data we have, but so I would like us to recommend to the city that we go ahead and add an additional special geography.
Okay.
I'll go with that.
So the one being recommended, what we currently have is what is highlighted. And it's a little slow. Got a little bit of lag here. Is it gonna get? There we go. What's currently highlighted is what we have already requested. What's being recommended is that we add rivers and streams, which will give us that new data. So, see what it is adding. Do you mean that, or do you mean is the blue what you're more interested in? The stream buffers.
Remind me what's showing up as the blue.
Stream buffers is blue right now.
Oh, yeah.
Rivers and streams is just that.
Buffers.
So that is rivers and streams is what is currently highlighted.
Yeah, rivers and streams might be too. Let's show the buffers again, would you please? So that's got the main branches of Lion and Mackle here. It looks like it has. Some blue, it has some of the major tributaries.
Yeah.
I believe it has all of what's in rivers and streams.
That's
but
probably enough of the
buffer.
kind of picture we want.
Yeah, I think that's actually better.
The buffer, well,
Yeah, that's the major stream systems.
Yeah, so it doesn't look like I'm not seeing anything that is in rivers and streams that is not also in stream buffers, but stream buffers gives you the additional width.
Yeah. And I think that's good recommendation. That's really
Yeah.
It helps to see it. Thank you.
Kyle, I know you missed most of, or at least a portion of this conversation previously. Do you have any questions or thoughts that you'd like to share before we move towards potentially recommending that we are discussing asking KCD to add an additional layer to our map that will give us canopy coverage by different cross sections? One of the cross sections currently is wetlands, and we are talking about adding stream buffers. It will cost $500 of our dedicated KCD funds.
Right. Yeah, I caught most of that. And yeah, I'm in support of it. No additional comment.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept Mark's motion.
I'll
second it. I'd like to make a motion that we add to the KCD project, the stream buffers layer.
I believe it needs to be that we request that the city request adding and dedicate funds, correct? Because we can't actually
Yeah, we can't say.
approve, add it. We can say, Christy, please go back to Mark and work with whoever the city clerk to figure out if we can dedicate an extra $500 towards this. We are officially recommending that the city
So
do that.
it's a recommendation.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I move that the tree board recommends that we add to the KCD project the stream buffer layer to the project to add that additional information.
I second that.
Thanks for being here. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Kyle says hot, says aye.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, that has been officially recommended. Let us know if you need anything else from us or any other clarification.
The important thing is we're making the minutes as complicated as possible.
This is going to be an absolute mess.
Maybe we should restart the meeting.
He thinks it's her last thing.
Had to end on a high note.
Yeah.
But in more seriousness, did you want to go back and revisit the roundabout topic? Because I think it would be much cleaner if there was any sort of recommendation coming from the tree board tonight, and then obviously Christy and Elizabeth could pass that along to Katie and Rebecca.
Yeah.
Yes.
Would we like to revisit that and make any kind of formal recommendation?
I mean, I'm all for talking about it. I mean, I don't think my recommendation would change from my personal comment earlier. I do feel like Doug would have a lot to add to the discussion, so that's my only hesitancy is in making a decision now that he would not be part of that.
Kyle also was not, while he is here now, was not here for any of that presentation, so I would be hesitant about moving forward with any formal recommendation, asking him to vote on something he was not here to, has not been able to review, so.
We're really talking about recommendations for the tree selection, tree replacement selection trees.
Yeah,
Correct.
there's 6, I think, recommendations, is that right?
There were 6 recommended.
Different
yeah.
options.
Different options, yeah.
Or 2 to 3 trees, is that right?
Correct.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
it's however many trees it would take to get to about 1,000.
1,100 square
I
feet.
see,
Yes.
okay, right.
So could we say that we would recommend going forward for Doug's approval as well?
I don't think we have anything that we are formally recommending at this point. I think we are ending at the place of, we will let all of the attendees who were not here know that the information is posted, and then folks can give individual opinions directly to Christy or Katie.
So you don't want to vote on it now?
I don't think we have anything that feels
And
formal. enough to vote on.
procedurally, it would be awkward to say that you're voting to defer to Doug.
Okay.
And like I said, since Kyle hasn't been able to actually review it, I don't want to ask for a vote on something that there's incomplete information in the room on.
So I did pay attention to Richard's comment about native trees. I wonder why you didn't find any native trees that you thought would be suitable there, I guess. I mean, the big iconic trees, I think I can understand that.
Yeah, yeah. I think Vine Maples provided very little canopy coverage. I was kind of going for bigger. Having like our general tree list, I'm like, what native trees did I not select?
Needing things with enough canopy cover, but that won't have root intrusion.
No fruit. So Amelanchier was one I wanted to add, which is the service berry. Berries in the name, had fruit, that was out.
Yeah, the attractive trees.
Yes, no
Big flowers.
showy flowers, no fruit was
Yeah.
where I was trying to focus. And then
Red Cedar and Doug fir too big for that space.
Yep. Madrone was a good option, but I don't have a lot of experience with those taking very well. And
State tree of the hemlock.
hemlock. Yep, it gets really big. That's kind of why I didn't recommend the hemlock or the fir tree.
In my thought, it's a fairly small amount of trees, and we're having a lot more trees that we can plant in other areas that don't have those constraints, so we can make sure a lot of native trees get planted in other areas. So, I think I trust that you've done due diligence on this.
Yeah.
All reviewed with Sam. And I think even Drew. I actually haven't spent a whole lot of time on the tree replacement list, but I think it's safe to say there probably are a lot of native trees. Yep. This is just that kind of small, like after the fact, there's this additional tree that needs to be removed. It's removing this much square footage and we got to replace this.
So the other plants were set.
Yes, those other plants are set. Yep. yeah, I haven't spent too much time looking over it because they are set, they were reviewed by previous urban forest planners and. Yeah.
How about the Gary Oak?
Very oak.
Gary Oak?
Yeah. I don't, I think for time's sake too, we really tried to whittle the list down instead of just providing
Yeah,
everybody
yeah.
with the entire list to review.
Oh,
Not saying like Gary Oak, like, no way.
Not saying these are the only 6 that could possibly work
Yeah,
there, but these
But
are
for
6
the
that
time
would work
constraints,
well.
Yeah,
Gary
yeah,
Oak.
because
in
they
this
do
space.
want an answer
Yeah,
the very longest 2 weeks.
Yep.
But ideally next week, we want a decision. So the thought process behind that was like, let's whittle the list down to some good options.
Yeah.
That would be suitable. The Gary Oak now, does that drop acorns? I think that's probably one of the reasons
It maybe,
why I
that
was
maybe
thinking
does
no
that.
oaks.
It's one that keeps coming up. Ross and I have been looking into drought resistant trees and it's one that always shows up on the list.
Ginkgo's native here, this side of the box too.
Councilmember
Yeah,
Goldman,
Ginkgo's a
do you
good
have
street tree, Kester is a great street tree, Jeffy's hornbeam, great street tree.
So this is just pure Google research now, so it definitely doesn't replace urban forest planning expertise. But it looks like the shore pine is native to our area and the incense cedar is native to Northern California. So especially if climate is changing in the next 30 years, Seattle in 30 years from now might look a lot like Northern California today.
Both of those.
Another one I was kind of playing with was the yellow cedar, the Alaskan cedar. But I have experience with those being quite messy trees. Had one at my home in Cleella, and I was constantly picking up cedar branches, or not even branches, leaflets. So I was going into the meeting with Public Works. The first thing they said is no shedding. And I'm like, well, wait a second. We're talking live trees here. And so kind of with that first, like that was the first thing they said is these trees cannot make a mess. I'm like, oh, that's impossible. And that's part of my job is to explain, like, and so that's also why we were going with smaller trees, less canopy, or less, foliage, smaller trees ultimately is going to be less matter.
Now, the tree
Titus.
list that we've been working on for the last 2.5, 3 years
Yeah.
does list the shore pine as a native tree.
Okay. Yep.
It's it's more compact than some of the other big evergreens.
Yeah, and I have that written down from as what's a strong interest
what you
in that.
Yep.
I also have a stronger interest in conifers, so
Yeah,
right there with yeah.
well, gosh, I know, that sounds like a good choice to me, I guess.
We can even shove 3 shore pines in there if that's, or if we want diversity, we could do the incense cedar and the
The
pine.
board has 2 of them, we could donate.
They do. They were kind of small.
But you saw them, they're kind of small.
If you would want a sizable
30 years marked up.
tree. And I'm thinking I think Public Works has the budget for it, so we can get big ones.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, is it that what we want to do is to, I'm intrigued by these other trees too, that might be wonderful trees. But I think there might be some value to hold it to something like a shore pine.
Thinking of recommending a deadline of next Friday for people to get back to you guys.
Yeah.
So if folks want to do any further research, look up things, discuss individually, not as a group. And give hopefully Doug, I don't know if he's going to be available or able to look at it between now and then. I don't know what his travel is. And potentially Minda, Stacy, Kyle, give them a chance to review the presentation if they would like to, and provide any feedback to Katie and Christy by end of next week.
And then
Would you like to email everyone requesting they do that, or would you like me to send that email? I'm happy to. I already have it written on my hand, so it's pretty official.
I'll let you do it. I'll let you do it, and then
I'll send that email.
I'll follow up that following week, to give you the what we've gone with and why.
An information share on
Yes, yeah.
what transpired.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
So I'm sorry, where did we leave that? we're going to individually
Yes.
Yeah.
communicate our feeling to,
Any further thoughts and opinions you have can be emailed to Katie and Christy.
okay.
And I will send an email to the whole tree board, including Katie, so everybody has her email.
Previous comments are also considered.
Excellent. The last thing that was on our old business was updates on articles, which I feel like we have sort of touched on, but I believe, was it Ross was going to work on a next article about Holly? Did I get that right? Thank you. What have you got? You want to give us an overview?
This is basically, just that after removing a holly tree at 5 Acre Woods, last month, and seeing how deep the roots go and how easy they are to resprout, it makes this, something important to me, so.
Mhm.
And just the fact that they're so invasive with, birds, just tending to move them out so easily that I think we need to let people know that even though the berries are so beautiful in the holiday season, it's a good idea to pull them out. And I hadn't realized before this that how, if you have a large one that you have to put on a systemic herbicide. I, tend to hate the idea of that, but if it's needed, it's needed. And
I do think, Ross, there is a caution about doing that, like near a stream. I know that's practice when, like in parks, but when it's right near a stream, I think you're supposed to avoid using that.
Oh, good to know. Yeah. Yeah.
Always read the label.
Yeah.
The labels
So
belong.
I wonder if there's anything about how close to the stream that.
It probably would be on the label, yeah. Of your your
Okay,
crossbow or
I'll
tortoise.
look that up then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I'd certainly encourage people to try to dig out the whole root system.
Are you picturing this as something that we put out as an article similar to the Ivy one in a future LFP newsletter?
That's what I was asked to do, I think, yeah.
They are quarterly. Is that a true statement? So presumably there'll be one 6 months from now, which would be the beginning of December. Or
3 months.
yes, but December seems like a more appropriate time to tell people about Holly than August.
Sure.
Or September, whenever that would be. I think that when, what, 2 Christmases ago, Richard did a Holly article about why you should not plant holly, even though it's pretty. And why you should be careful with
Yeah,
the
I
berries.
was wondering when I think it was more recent than that one.
I think it was a year and a half ago. I don't think it was this past Christmas, but I could be wrong.
I think he did another article about just holly. Oh, no. There was another discussion about holly in Seattle. Also, they both, they're right.
And it's male and female too, you don't necessarily have the right one. If you're gonna plant for the berries, you better get the female.
Yeah. Do folks agree with me? Do we want to try to get something about holly in the next version of the newsletter, or are we shooting for 2 from now in December?
I think if we don't have one for next time, that we do it.
I think next time.
I think a lot of people would hesitate to go out and try to cut down their holly tree in December.
Yeah.
I think this fall might be an easier time to convince people to go out and tell
Fair.
them. And I can ask Richard for his thing to see if he's got anything written in a better way than mine.
Get it into short article format. Did we ever figure out, I believe with the Ivy one, we were talking about asking whether there's somewhere on the city website that we are able to post like a longer form version to link to? Do we know if we got an answer on that?
We can put it on the tree board website.
put up, just like link to a PDF or something of a longer form article?
Yeah.
Okay, because that's what I'm thinking, like the best trees to replace with may make a good supplemental link to it, put a PDF of that information somewhere on the site, since that'll be too long, I'm guessing, to fit in an actual article piece.
Yeah, it'd be great to have just a running list of all the articles in we.
Yes.
Yeah.
Got an archive, library of those articles.
Have you discussed the third English gift that we have that's basically the laurel?
Like cherry laurel, yeah. I've
Cherry laurel.
Yeah.
That's better.
uh,
Because those are, if not worse than the holly tree, but they are. Just
Your partners in crime.
the trouble is people use them for screens and hedges and stuff. As long as you keep them in check, they're fine. But boy, they're like the holly. You just pretty fold it down, it plants itself and it roots up and just keeps going.
yeah, I was anticipating that, so I wrote an article about cherry laurel too.
Oh, you did. Good for you.
Let's have ahead.
Those are hard to adapt.
That could be for next time, next one.
We can look for volunteers from the rest of the tree board as well. Would anyone who is here right now like to work with Ross on editing, refining, get it ready for the next newsletter?
You original reviewer, sure.
Great, okay.
That's to finalize a Holly article.
Yep.
Perfect.
To take the excellent start we've got here.
There's this one that's percolating in the background of appropriate trees for the changing climate. Which I think we'll have to keep working
And
on.
it sounds like it'd be good to get Doug involved in that too.
Yeah, I'm surprised we came up with so many. Well, we can talk offline.
Yeah, I thought it'd be better to have more, so because it's easier to X them out than to
Yeah.
to do it, but
Yeah, always start.
yeah.
And did we remind me for specifically the best trees for the warmer drier climate, were we going to develop that into another article, or was that something we were going to have as like a handout for tabling things? Or I'm trying to remember what our goal was with that information. Do you recall?
I thought it was an article.
Okay.
But all of these could serve dual purposes, good to.
I like the idea, yeah, do an article, do a one pager that can be handed out and put it on the report something, so it got multiple uses out of it.
Okay. This is something we can put on the climate hub too.
That newsletter goes to every address in the city, eh? Yeah, so that's good. That's much better coverage than the shoreline area news, for example. No reason why these articles could be published there too. Sure.
I'm guessing timing would align then if this one's going out beginning of June. Timing should work out if we do end up doing a fall tree giveaway. Putting info potentially in that if we are asking people to sign up for a tree giveaway or advertising it in some way. That may be a good vehicle to get into everyone's mailbox. If that feels like it's an appropriate use of it, if the blanking on the name of who runs that. Cat approves that, we would need to make sure that we have the details far enough in advance because they need submissions. It sounds like about a month out. So something to keep an eye on as we approach August is we'll probably want to be having our details for whatever sign up and distribution looks like if we're able to.
Yeah, we better try to get close to that at our next meeting.
Yeah.
Have some better information.
I'll sneak right up on us. I'm having meetings about holiday prep at work right now. It's coming. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Excellent. Anything else on communications or articles?
Not sure if it fits in that, but we're getting closer to videotaping Richard for the tree walk, so.
Excellent.
Just waiting until everybody can make the same day.
That'll be great. And you're planning to do that similar to the one that was done for Arbor Day, do Lion Creek
Right, yeah, not just Lion Creek. Not the-
Yeah. That made a great little, lots of different things all within like 50 feet of each other. Easy to just turn around and point to all the different things and learn about.
That was at the waterfront preserve.
Yeah, and he just did such a nice job, and there were kids there asking questions, and so we thought, wow, what a great thing to videotape for the future, because, he's just so rich with information and history.
Turns out Richard's a great teacher.
Yes.
Like he did it for a while.
And I was gonna invite the two kids that have been helping me most with the chess program to come
Awesome.
along, because they're good at asking questions. It makes a more interesting video, I think.
Saturday morning, right?
Yeah,
The new chess pieces that Ross has built go into action.
Very exciting. Anything else on communications? We don't have any events for a few months. So no immediate event outreach.
I have a question related to the beavers and the trees that they're eating at the park, and maybe Larry knows, on the May 14th, report to the council and the mayor about city events and everything. There was a point, item in there that said that they had a discussion with Beavers Northwest about a contract for Graceville Park, and I hadn't heard anything about that. I don't know if you were aware of anything on that.
I don't have any information to add about that, sorry.
Okay, I'll talk to Mayor Pete. So we can check it.
Good. One other Ivy thing. I believe last time we had talked about spitballing on if it would be possible to advertise or coordinate in some way efforts for volunteers to go out and help people pull ivy on private property. I believe you were going to reach out to the Stewardship Foundation and ask if something like that might be possible. Did you two connect, or so you connect with someone?
I had emailed my invite to you and Mark, but didn't get any answer back, and
I thought I had replied to you. I'm sorry.
Oh.
I might have a draft.
or maybe it went into my, who knows, but anyway, I thought, well, we can just wait till the meeting, so.
It's like, well, I'm
Yeah.
definitely not on the board, but I attend all the board meetings. So, I can probably drum up a lot of people. I have 120 people on my mailing list that would probably volunteer some of their time.
Yeah.
So
The
when is this
context-
for?
So the context of the conversation we were having is in talking to people and doing outreach, it seemed like in an effort, lots of people are concerned about ivy and lots of people are not motivated to go out and pull ivy for a Saturday or are not able to, or have ivy that they need help getting pulled. So we were talking about, would it be possible to recruit volunteers and have people sign up on a list to have volunteers come out and pull ivy on their property? What we talked about, my recollection at least, last tree board meeting was that we would love to support that kind of effort, but we are not necessarily set up to manage ongoing volunteer opportunities like that. The Stewardship Foundation came up as a group who does lots of work parties, lots of volunteer engagement, and has a robust program, but we wanted to reach out and see if that's something that you guys have done, are already doing, or maybe interested in partnering in making happen.
Well, we'd love to do that. It's just that, our discussion was, is that gonna be a city liability? Is the city gonna come in and say, oh, no, you can't do that? Or, we do have disclaimer forms that we filled out for first-time volunteers. Is that gonna be required? I don't know. I mean, I could probably get a lot of volunteers, but I'm not sure how cities
Yeah.
would react to that.
Is it something that if it either is a one-time event or an ongoing event, that Stewardship Foundation, you don't have to answer this right now, you can take it back, talk to people. I think part of the question was, would Stewardship Foundation have interest or capacity in doing the volunteer management and kind of running of it with partnership from the tree board and helping to do some recruitment, helping to staff the day. But to the best of my knowledge, our team is not particularly set up to
I
like
get that, yeah.
do the logistics behind it. It takes a lot of
As
work
Gene
to do
mentioned,
that.
we've done that in the past, so I think, I think that it's just that it happens and then a year or two passes, nothing goes on, so.
Yeah.
It needs to be some kind of a continuous.
Yeah.
Thing to get bigger, so I'm gonna send out a board this week and see if I can get some volunteers potential.
I think you'd be best off if you could find legal advice outside of the city. It seemed to me that if you had a lawyer that you would advise you what to be liability, you don't need to also. We just said you were.
I'm
worried
an
about-
honest citizen, I don't need lawyers.
There you go.
So I don't need a city lawyer would. Be
No,
willing
and-
to come in.
No, which I don't think so, but you would express a concern about whether the city would raise questions about.
Yeah.
I think if you satisfy that.
Well, see if anybody's got a lawyer handy,
I have realized it is 8:59.
Yep.
So,
shut up.
we should be wrapping up. Next meeting is scheduled for July first. Thank you. It is the week of the 4th, though. I did want to confirm so that we have quorum. Are folks going to be around and available, or do we need to look at moving that meeting?
Sorry, which date did you say?
It is Wednesday, July 1st.
I would love to move it. I don't know. I know this is I don't know if I have any say, but
Oh,
Kyle will not be able to make the July meeting
I'm checking.
I'm-
First,
on the 1st.
okay, so.
I may need to do it remotely if we do it that day, but I could do it.
Since so many people aren't here, it might be worth sending out a general poll who is available on the 1st.
Yeah.
And then maybe consider the 8th instead.
Would for the folks currently in the room, would the 8th work better?
Either one's fine with
Either
me.
one works with me.
Would you be back on the 8th?
Yeah.
Okay. Kyle, would you be available on the 8th?
I'll still be out of town actually.
Okay. Since we're missing so many folks, I can include that in my email follow-up to the group. With dates and information about today's presentation and opportunities for feedback. Okay. And with that, we will wrap up. Meeting is adjourned.
Good.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Nice job.
We don't have to have.
One sec. Oh, would anyone like to move to adjourn?
I heard, you adjourned.
I'll second it.
I
Respected.
Meeting is adjourned.
yeah, I'm sitting.
We started at 4 times, we got ended at 1.